So it seems there's a bit of disagreement about some of these issues I brought up in the video. Now, I think the first and most important thing for us to do is actually to go back to Sean's video and to get at explicitly what he said, because I think there's a bit of disagreement between Theologica and myself about what the actual point of Sean's video was. So let's go to that.
I'm going to argue that this painting has certain qualities that are undetectable to science, which only deals in quantity.
Fundamentally, I understood Sean's video to be talking about what science can and cannot say. He's attempting, in a way, to attribute to the painting certain properties that he believes are qualitative and are undetectable by science.
If there was no DNA on this painting, and if my signature was not at the bottom, and if you only had the painting, there is nothing in the painting itself that points to me as its author. There is no scientific experiment that would spit out the name Sean when you tested this thing.
I took the thought experiment then to be precisely as he had said. If I don't have a signature and I don't have any DNA on the painting itself, is there any way for me to determine its authorship? And the answer is a resounding yes. But Theologica's understanding of this is very different. I'll take his video now.
The argument is this. Consider an intricate painting. The painting was painted to convey a message, was painted with a specific intent and motive, and has specific qualities directly attributable to the mind of the painter. Further, upon materialistic, quantitative, property-esque analysis of the painting, none of the former qualitative characteristics can even possibly be found. The analogy carries, therefore, that the world described, analyzed, and pondered about in this type of scientific analysis will never yield an understanding of its fundamental nature.
In this, Theologica basically drops the entire point that Sean was making about authorship, and I'll take that to mean that he basically agrees with that. Instead, he wants to focus on the issues of meaning and intentionality. I'll get back to that in a minute, because there's a very interesting mistake that both he and Sean make, and it happens basically right before your eyes. In fact, it's in the clip I just showed you. It's uncanny, really. But for the moment, let's focus on his objections to my Pollock example.
Michael's arguments surrounding the painting analysis and its ability to tell us the identity of the painter are very interesting, though I'm confident that they are misplaced. Firstly, the 2 or 3 minutes spent on comparing Pollock's paintings with false Pollock paintings, and with analysis of brush strokes and all this, assumes fundamental background knowledge that is in no way present in the painting argument, and makes the analogy a false one. The knowledge of painting comparisons that is missing is that there is a knowledge of a true Pollock painting compared with possible Pollock paintings in this counterexample. The reason you can do the scientific analysis on a possible Pollock painting and yield that it is or is not a Pollock painting would be because you could compare it with, precisely as Michael argues, a previously known Pollock painting.
My response to this is to say, of course, and obviously. Obviously, my analogy assumed there were other known Jackson Pollock paintings that we could compare our unknown painting to. All that Sean actually said was if we didn't have his DNA and we didn't have his signature and we found an anonymous painting, would we be able to determine that it was his using the methods of science? And the truth is, yes, absolutely we would. Forensic science is filled with possible ways of finding third-party observable data which would determine authorship. In fact, interestingly, art historians found themselves in exactly this situation earlier this year, when Picasso paintings were found that contained no signature. Yet they were able, through analysis, to determine exactly who the author was, and determine that they were actually not forgeries. And they couldn't do this entirely on the basis of word of mouth or on the basis of what someone said. They had to go to science because that is a third-party investigatable sort of system. What Sean was trying to do was to show us that there were limitations on what science can do. And I guess where Theologica is getting confused is he's reading too much into the part where Sean holds up the painting and says, if I had only this painting, would science be able to tell us that? Theologica seems to assume that if we only had that painting, that we wouldn't have any other painting by Sean. But this is a false analogy to science. It's kind of a ridiculous analogy, actually, because most science takes place in some sort of web of other beliefs and theories. In that case, I would agree with him that it's a bad analogy, but surely this is a failure on Sean's part, because he's given us an analogy, if we're interpreting him that way, which has absolutely no relevance to any work that scientists do or have ever done. And to miss that, I think, is a massive mistake. But I would say also that this is a bit off topic because it pertains to Sean. And I think, as I've said earlier, that Sean and Theologica are making entirely different claims. And this is where things become kind of confusing. What Sean was doing in the title of his video and all the way through it was to say that there were certain types of knowledge that were off limits to science. Now, he says this because science cannot deal with what he terms qualitative data. What exactly qualitative data is not clear because he never defines it. He does, however, give us the example of authorship. And he said, in absence of the signature and the DNA, would I be able to determine authorship? I've shown that actually through quantitative data and mathematically derived fractals, I think would be quantifiable data, we could determine who the author of a particular point was. The point is that actually we don't need the qualitative data if we have enough quantitative data, because at least in that example of authorship. Now, somewhat confusingly, Theologica has put out the idea that Sean was actually talking an analogy to the world, that the painting was the world, and that scientific knowledge can't arrive at meaning, intention, and purpose. He's also said that the reason we can't do that is because we don't have another world to compare to, and that was what he thought undercut my analogy with the painting. What's amazing about this is that Theologica, with ruthless efficiency actually, has undercut one of the best arguments for God's existence ever devised, which was the inference from design. We can congratulate him on this, on the atheist account, but then ask exactly what he thought he was doing at that point. The truth is, we might not even need another world to compare. All we might need is just a simple everyday pop can, because it actually shows us some of the fundamentals of what engineers do and the way in which they look at the world. Here I use Bill Hammack's discussion of a simple pop can to demonstrate some of the principles of engineering.
Here's the key problem an engineer solved in designing this tab. How to make it with a minimum amount of material, but which will work every time on the billions of pop cans made every year.
Bill Hammond goes on to explain that the pop can works by changing a first-class lever into a second-class lever. This is important because it shows us how we can create a functioning lever with the minimum number of resources. We never needed two worlds, one designed and one not, in order to infer design. All we needed was other designed objects. We could then take those designed objects and infer certain principles of design, like resourcefulness. Unfortunately, our actual existent universe is not very resourceful. It's incredibly wasteful. So therefore, we would conclude that the world is not designed, and we don't need another world in order to do that. Unfortunately, we end this with the things that have not been shown tonight. Sean has not shown that authorship as a qualitative piece of data cannot be inferred from science. I've given you examples why it would be. And Theologica has not shown us that science or naturalistic observation couldn't show us design. We would just also need to have other data points. This is the point both of them seem to miss.